thinking that you are going to do? What will it be? Writing your memoirs? I thought I might read something about philosophy. Are you really so unambitious? One of the most important things in being an artist, perhaps in human being, but think of this in relation to art, is courage. That you've got to have nerve. You've got to have the courage to destroy what you think is no good and reject it. And the courage to hold on at a certain moment. This is rather hard to explain perhaps, but there's, I think the tendency, this is a general moral thing, I think, but it's sort of thinking of it in terms of creation of art, that there's a very strong temptation, if one can do something moderately well, to move very quickly from the moment when you think, well, this is all provisional, this is a sketch, this is not really a finished thing, to then thinking, oh, well, now it's too late. Actually, it is the finished thing. I'll jump from saying it's too soon to saying it's too late. And it's the middle, it's in between these two things. This is the area that you've got to enlarge. This is where the courage comes in, where you've got to say, well, I'm not going to finish this now. I don't regard it as finished, and I'm not going to say it's too late. I'm not going to say it's all gone on too far, gone too long. I'm going to hold on to it very, very closely and make it better, and think in a way that really hurts. You know, when doing philosophy, thinking often hurts.
Answer. I'm out. I cannot push anymore this idea to its limits. This is it. This is how it must be. It could have been different, but I cannot force it anymore. Time's up. I'm sorry, but I did it without thinking means excuse me, because while performing action X, the I think did not accompany my representations. Answer. If current forms of capitalism purposefully sustain a sense of crisis, then this is it. But I have to satisfy the notion of the object that I am. I am not extremely well prepared for that object. And the rest. So this project with Iris Murdoch on Iris Murdoch, or as Iris Murdoch as a mirror to myself, started in this place called Coolbawn in Ireland in 2016. And I show you this image because after I visited this castle, which was kind of in this bad state, I kind of discovered many chambers in it. But suddenly, at some point, I kind of fell or tried to just see what's going on in this area, in this tiny, tiny corridor. And I had a panic attack while I was here. Because I was scared that I couldn't get out anymore. Because there was this two kind of very, very high walls. And on one side there was this hall, which I guess it led to some sort of basement. And on the other side it was sort of a jungle-ish kind of trajectory where you could probably get out, but it was so full of this sort of stuff that you, like ivy and like trees and different sorts. So at that point I looked at this straight ahead, as you might look at this dark hall, and I was thinking that if I would go through that hall, it will suck me up like a black hole, and I'll disappear. Sounds to some degree ridiculous, I know, but that happened actually. I don't know why, or I don't know how, but it just happened. And so I just smoked a cigarette at some point, and I decided I should take a photograph after I calmed myself down, and made my way out through the other side. And then from that moment, I treated the castle as a sort of like image of my mind, in which, again, sounds peculiar in a way, or that you wouldn't want to get into your mind, and that you might be just scared of going that deep into your mind. And this is how this project on Mary's murder came about, actually. And I insist on telling you this because many things that I'll talk about today have some sort of relationship to the mind, or to failing of the mind, or kind of dilution of it, or this kind of incapability of like making sense with whatever you have in here. So this is the sort of
I think that the interior of every human mind, one can't test this statement, is a place of very, very strange things, very deep fears, deep longings, imagery of all kinds, and far more extraordinary than anything that psychoanalysis can reveal. In a way, there's so little is known about the minds of individuals.
Is there anything that you're especially afraid of?
Well, I'm afraid of not being able to write anymore.
Gerald got up and went to the shelves, knowing where to look, and as he touched the books, he felt some fierce and agonizing sense of the past. It's gone, he thought, the past. It is irrevocable and beyond mending and far away, and yet here it is, blowing upon one like a wind. I can feel it, I can smell it, and it's so sad, so purely sad.
Answer: the object that you are in crisis. Yes, it effectively means I am taking myself out of circulation. Answer: you deliberately hold back resources, free time and potentials that could be used productively. I ask of you to be meaningful in stages, like a thinking plant. Your passivity in time will become poetic inspiration to others. Stasis may count for a memorial. Pause for this event of 1 meter.
muddle that she realised was her philosophical outlook on life. While writing the last lectures, she was reduced to first depression and then despair. It was very, very sad seeing her during those years. It went on for about 2 years. She kept writing and rewriting that bloody book. And one could tell, even before it came out, that it was going to be bad. And one could tell she knew it was bad. And one could tell that she didn't really know how to do philosophy.
That was Peter Conradi, her Iris Murdoch's biographer, who considered herself a bad philosopher. And as he explains, she thought of herself as being a bad philosopher, even though her whole life tried to make sense or tried to be taken seriously as a philosopher. And he goes on to say in other interviews that the onset of Alzheimer's and what happened afterwards was very, very accentuated by the turmoil that she went in writing, as he mentioned in the last lectures. It's kind of like a last statement that she could possibly make in a way to be treated and to be taken seriously as a philosopher, and that, I guess, troubled her so much mentally that up to a point of being turning into a pathological case. And well, she finished that book anyway. But this nuance of of herself wanting to create something and to prove that something is actually not working, I think this is really interesting. And I try to kind of work in a way as much as I can in this kind of canon, if one might say it like that, in a sense that to embrace this kind of failure that is in a way in itself in the work of art, that it is expected in a way. So instead of looking for clarity or for meaning or for polished kind of discourse and all these things, a way into the work would be through the failure of the work. And I think, well, she probably had she couldn't think of it in those terms, but that was actually not interesting for her, I think. She still tried to make sense up to the end of her life. But indirectly, I think she made more sense through going through all these errors and going on and on the same terrain, doggedly, as she says, until it hurts, until the mind hurts, and being as actually a feature of philosophical thinking, as she says, which is philosophical thinking being a thinking that is anti-natural, is contra-natural, that it doesn't come natural to our brains. You have to make a heavy effort in a way to produce this kind of abstraction, which is not inherently in our minds. So she insisted many times on that. And yeah, we can move forward with this. This is one way I worked with what I just said before. It is a work called Dignity to the Unsaid. This is just a trailer.
There's a little shiver when what is surfaces, but in my heart I already knew. I am dementing. I am dementing. I am dementing.
Note to public. Remember, present subjects, the movement is in your cerebrum. A relatively new acquisition. 2.5 million years.
And you seem to connect. The idea of experience with the notion of preconceived attitudes or dogmas or beliefs which impede.
These gestures actually belong to Iris Murdoch. They were taken from, reenacted from an interview from 1984 with Krishnamurti. At that point she was unaware of herself suffering of this disease.
Creative present exists.
But scientifically, scientists talk about the fact that Alzheimer's starts to kind of develop in the body 25 years before one has like a first present sign in, visual sign. She went to London to do something, and then she arrived in London and she couldn't remember what she wanted to do, and she came back to Oxford. That was the sign that something is deeply wrong. Answer. I mean, I always thought that pushing my intellect had to be made explicit. Keats wouldn't have agreed, don't you think? Question. The interior of his mind brought about the illusion of his body being outgrown with glands. These were all notes or agreement between knowledge and opinion, or gestures with the tongue. Answer. But this activity is rather independent of the mental habits of the public. I mean, these words can be taken for granted, Thus, sounds do have a connection with meaning. My intellectual honesty, when performing in this canon, can be mocked. A Lord Byron joke on Keats, a snuffed out. Answer. According to William Epsom, the meaning of poetry is not important, because it is apprehended as pure sound. What really matters is the atmosphere. Meaning is resolved by itself. You let it happen. Language is more about miscommunication than communication. Anyway, no matter what I'm doing or not doing, it is an expression of being busy. Just loiter. I mean, is loitering in a gallery half the work? Another way to commit to art? How would you know? Just be, not do, if anything is not being. The suspicion that loitering is a cover-up of misconduct, of hidden intentions. I loiter in one, in sync, it's an ideology. Inactivity is a memorial, or satisfaction. Refusing to move along, to move. Laughing as a filler. Back in 1818, in a letter to Richard Woodhouse, John Keats believed of himself as someone who feels something else. Substituter, the sun, the sea, always the sea, the sea, the sea. 1 year later, Keats was diagnosed with consumption, which nowadays it's called tuberculosis. And from February 1820, he referred to his life as a posthumous existence. In this work, 5 Moments of Silence for Penguin number 7, I keep moments of silence in Romania, in different parts of Romania, most of them in my hometown, for an inexistent work, a work that is more or less on the page, or in some notebooks, or just in my head. And the idea is only to fill the space with just a simple presence, nothing more and nothing less, in the sense that you have a timeline of the artwork. So you have, for example, 215 days, 9 hours, 18 minutes, etc., until the work would be materialized. So at this point it's not materialized, it will be materialized, meaning I would fill the work with different activities, different images or texts or who knows what routines. But while I'm filling the work with it, I'm pausing and, in a sense, treat the work as a possibility of filling it with my own presence, so that it's like a symptom to something else. My body as a symptom to something else, that it will be more or less materialized in the work. Regarding text and how I work with text, this is one example that has a kind of a different strategy, in the sense that I approach the text really technical. So you have the word literature. In this, literature has shape. The continuation is typography has. And the dancers are approaching the letter faces, approaching the letter faces through the end parts, formal parts of the letters. So the dancer is always kind of working his way around in circles, where going back, literature has always from 90 degrees, goes on and on and on like that. When he approaches the word has, he skips has, because also this is how we read words, we skip connective words. Has is something like that. And we arrive at shape. And shape, he makes the shape of the shape. He doesn't enact the shape as what it might mean, the shape. He just makes the halo of the shape. So that my instruction would have been was actually over-inked. The old terminology from design, or the envelope of the overall shape, or the printed surface, all this. These were all kind of my directions to the dancer, and this is how he approached letter S, for example. Technical mapping of an overall hygiene. This is how I call my method of working with typography, sort of hygiene. So the significance of the word in stanza is taken in by the performer to superimpose it when overscaling it from finial cuts. This is absolutely technical specification. It's very difficult to work with somebody who's trained to work with his body as sort of to approach the metaphor in the text. But the text is used in England on the motorways. This is how it is used on this like on these boards. It was created by John Kinnear and Margaret Calvert, and it was specifically done to view it from a distance, so that the driver it is done from the point of view of the driver. So in a sense, you have to see the text from a specific distance and to make sense of the text. Otherwise, to decide, you turn left, you turn right, or you move forward, or whatever. So it's this idea of distance that it's important in this kind of writing, not necessarily the other finite qualities to it. Because sometimes it looks quite rough if you look at it on the boards. So my main inspiration for this as a starting point for the performers were these images from Theo van Desborg's The Dancers, due to the fact that Theo van Desborg's dancers are composed are made out of this kind of geometrical shapes, which if you look at the typeface, also the typeface has this quality. So the transcription, for example, of a literature has literature. Only the word literature is like half a page, which is like a vertical stem, L. To end, it ends down at baseline in curved terminal to right at 81 degrees. To vertical stem, I, and it goes on and on like that. The idea was to overcome the page, and this is all the time I keep talking about this idea that of the question of where is the text? Is it, or the meaning of the text? Is it in the mind, in your mind? Is it in the physical position in the space of how you can read the text, if it's like from a distance, or is it on the page, or is it again, in the technical aspect of the typeface? I mean, if you have Shakespeare transcribed, if you can transcribe Shakespeare technically from this point of view, you would end up with probably 20 volumes. But you still have Shakespeare in it, Romeo and Juliet, but you never arrive actually to Romeo and Juliet to make sense of Romeo and Juliet, if that makes any sense in a way. You stumble across technical aspects of writing, which is again a channel of communication. But everything, it's directions and angles and thicknesses. This is another example of how I worked with a dancer and how he approaches the letter A. This is the routine of letter A. He doesn't represent the letter phase. That's something that I ask of him. It's not about representation of letters, of making them beautiful or aesthetic with the body. It's something else which he knows. He's the only one who actually knows. I only gave him the transcript of the typeface. This is another work, which is called Prepare Point Number 2. And it is kind of a wall installation. This is the most recent work that I have in London now at the Fina Foundation. It's a kind of a changed module of the same work. And the overall idea is that one can never really grasp whatever is written on the slides, regardless if he can be in all perspectives at once. You will always kind of miss one side of the work. And missing one side of the work, one perspective, one angle, you would end up with kind of a gap in the text, and the gap for me is very, very important in redefining again the poem. The text of the poem is like this: to persist as a body in the world, in a world of rubble, over and over again, in the right place, with the wrong word. The bad breath of a note. Speaking is hemorrhage, is bad design. Make your prose, do it elsewhere. Closer to excrement than to your words. The story must exist in each word, or it cannot go on. But how can you make all this when you can think things that everyday accepts as creep-ups from the outside? Getting the point chokes doubt. 2. FACTS. Facts. The bankrupt pile of actions of whatever in here. This is the actual display, the slides. This is how I created them. This time in SO type letterface, created by Soderhavet. It's the same Swedish agency that created the previous font with the one dancer. And like this, they have like this kind of design, kind of quality to it. But when you use them in such a display, they all kind of let's see if I can zoom. No, interfere in a sense, and they dilute or transgress each other. Yeah, this is a slide of Guillaume Apollinaire, just to remind myself more or less that I'm not actually doing anything really new. 1918. This is how he does Joshua Hubbard. He does letter T, T, hygiene of literature, is part of the literature. Adjusting to the baseline of letter L. These are the three dancers that that perform Dignity to the Unsaid. So fusing to present is an illness, and well, that's a hard one in a way. At least because of it is so condensed as a one line. The overall idea of this line, I don't even know how to put it, because it's the references of this text come from many perspectives. One of them comes from Lucian Pintelia, who's a Romanian, one of the probably the most well-known, internationally well-known film director. He's still alive. He's I think approaching 90, and he uses this kind of aspect of reality as a disease. That if you attach too much to reality, to be normal or to adapt to whatever is going on around you, in his films you notice that this is a quality that he actually wants to run away from. And the question that he has in one of his films, and he insists on that, the question of in the film called Too Late, which is his most bleak film ever. He has this kind of line.
Să fugi, să dispari, sau să rămâi.
To run, to disappear, or to stay.
Bleiben, a rămâne. Verschwinden, a dispărea. Verschwinden oder bleiben. Căcat, șes. Zu spät.
And it is interesting in a way if you think of how you approach, of how I kind of approach this kind the work with text in general. I try to approach it from this kind of angle, and in an implicit way to ask if you can get me out of my work, because there is always this tendency to be always in your work, like literally always. So how would one get the author out? I mean, can you? So you have to decide, isn't it? Like, to stay, as he says, or to disappear. And can you do both? And anyway, in his films, apparently you really cannot do both. You can run, and Lucian Pintelia chose to run at some point. He emigrated anyway in France. But then he came back, so when Romania was absolved by communism. So, but there's always this kind of problem of running or staying with the work, in your work. And in performance, I think it's very interesting. This is, I think you can reduce more or less the physicality to this question. Do you engage with what you do, or you don't engage with what you do? You're in it as X, or you're not in it, or you pretend that you are in it. So this ontological question, I think, is quite a present, more or less. I mean, this recently I started to think that it's basically in everywhere, basically. Yeah. So going back to too late and too soon, it should have beginning, middle, and end, and structure. It's for the characters to find their way out of it while being in it. This is what Iris Murdoch said in an interview in 99. The recording is in 99.
In a way, it's for the characters to find their way out of it while being in it.
So just imagine to fight your way out of it while you're in it. It's almost like that's the ontological aspect of a novel, of the characters in a novel, of the performer, if you want, because this is how I'm thinking actually, that the performer, in a way, what he or she wants to do basically is to get out of the performance by making the performance. So the problem of being and the problem of being the problem. So it is the weirdness of something as an ontological tenacity or a survivalist insistence on remaining that ultimately points to the horror of something. To put it differently, if something has to employ remaining as its ontological medium, it must also exteriorize extraneous belongings in order to remain in itself. Being something is equal to withdrawal from belonging, or points of access by which the object can be correlated to its outside or rendered intelligible. The citizen is a problem. He either complains or but he never really engages fully with whatever is going on around him. Again, it's like this idea of always trying to get out of something. And that in society creates problems. Just the fact that one eats alone, or dies alone, that's a factor of that destabilizes society. So, this quality of being a problem in the work, in society as well, how would one deal with that? And this is what I'm thinking of. For example, in this performance, I'm to the Royal Academy. How would you not consider? Can you try not consider as a problem? So then, in a sense, to adjust to the errors of the others that you perform with, and to embrace it in a way, so that it creates a sort of a soup in a way, in which all three of them, because there are three, try to make sense as much as they can. I eat alone, I breathe alone, I die alone. That's being a citizen. Eugenio Gioia said this, it is terribly difficult to take citizens seriously in what we call bureaucracy, but also politics. Often citizens are considered problems. Sometimes they have nothing interesting to say, other times they just complain. This is one snapshot of Iris Murdoch in a conversation from 1984, where she tried to make sense continuously with an excess of gestures. This is just a small animation with this text. I'm trying to more or less portray how she pronounced and did the text. It's about the word experience, which you sometimes use in your writings as representing something which you think we should in some sense overcome. And you seem to connect the idea of experience with the notion of preconceived attitudes or dogmas or beliefs which impede or a kind of being which you would connect with a creative present existence. I don't entirely understand this. It seems to me that would be impossible entirely to escape from experience. But I like just to stick to the term experience, because it's such a perhaps there's a very particular sense you want to attach to it. It's such a very general word. It seems to describe the continuity of consciousness, which is simply a characteristic of being human. Perhaps you could say something about that. So, the idea of inventing, as Iris Murdoch was insisting on, in this space between too soon and too late, this tiny space. I really like this fact that she insisted, she wasn't afraid of talking about the fact of working with imagination or with invention. You know, nowadays, I mean, I personally don't talk as an artist like that. I don't just say that, you know, this is like I invented, it's like it's an invention, or you know, it just came out of my imagination. You know, I mean, I never put this my work in these terms. But probably it's because I don't have the guts that she had, because I think she really understood what imagination can be, or can be, in the fact that it can be very productive in a sense, which who knows how one can describe imagination, or from where it comes from. You know, this kind of transcendental kind of contact with something that is beyond, you know, you cannot put your hand on something like that. Well, nowadays everything tends to be kind of critical, or linked to a page, or to to a book, or to a theory, or anything like that. So she talks about that very much. So, and the positions of writers or designers, for example, interested me very much, because it is in the positions in which they write, for example, that is also those positions are very important in what the writing will be, or the object would be. You know, so Keats, for example, you know, this is how people talk about Keats as reading, as portraying him as reading, or when he sits like that with his feet, like with leg like that, like stroking. So he's kind of quite short. I think he's like more or less my height, and so who knows what happens in this position, of how you kind of, you know, the alignment of the body permits kind of a sort of, not a communication, because that's kind of a ridiculous way to put it, with something. It's just something, you know, either a chemical aspect of the body, or whatever. But it's this idea of how one sits at a table, or an office situation, or whatever, when he or she creates.
This thinking that you are going to do, what will it...
I think I actually showed you this one. So this is the attitude, this is from a documentary on John Keats. So the attitude I speak of what was that of cherishing one leg over the knee of the other, smoothing the instep with the palm of his hand. In this action, I mostly associate him in an eager parley with Leigh Hunt in his little Vale of Health cottage. So this, the documentarist tries to enact the position that Keats used to sit or stay when he engaged in discussions or anything. This is a detail from a work called Architecture for Page Turn, in which again was very present was this idea of like this permanent kind of flipping of the page that we go through every day, or we used to do very often. And wanting to make it permanent, that it stays there forever, but without no kind of content on the page. And then the page for me became like the skin of this model, with the kind of half denigrating texts on the border of being pornographic and philosophical. I mean, lactescent worm. I had actually quite a few problems with these two of this, because of the whole what can one talk about nowadays of why is this model in the picture, why is it somebody more mature, or why is the text, or there's also this question nowadays. This is a situation that is very present in Romania now, and I think for the past 30 years actually. So instead of fixing whatever is to fix in a normal, like banal way, you try to move the mountain instead of moving the railway. This idea of like looking at the problem from kind of like a really uncanny way, from a weird point of view, that is again counterproductive. For me, it's interesting because it brings kind of situations of productiveness in a sense. Because when you do such a thing that is at the border of being ridiculous or unproductive, there is always something productive basically in that. The fact that your mind is kind of set to work, to approach the object from the situation from another angle, which, to the normal kind of, let's say, overall idea would be not natural or precarious in a way. This is a situation of an office, how I write, how I sit at the table, the position of my hands, my elbows. Gestalt me out, it's called. What you see on your right is Dieter Rams at the office, how Dieter Rams sits at the office. Of course he doesn't sit like that every day, but this is kind of his routine. Below is the integrated office of Martela, which is a Swedish design agency, furniture design agency. And what you see on the left is a performance at Venice biennial called the Finnish Method. I created a sort of diagram of left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. I'm going like that, and the same with the hands. Supposedly, that the Finnish created the thought of the architecture of the office, going from this kind of economy of steps around the office. That this kind of economy of steps would be the most efficient and most easy to kind of adapt or feel comfortable and work in a comfortable way. This is what happens, for example, in London. The Camden bench, which is a kind of an anti-place.
This afternoon we're skating the Camden bench, which is that thing there, which is designed specifically to be nothing but a bench. It's not designed to be skateboarded. In fact, it's designed specifically so you can't skateboard. It's designed so homeless people can't sleep on it, as well as you're not supposed to be able to fly a poster on it or anything like that.
Basically, you cannot do nothing. It's only...
It's quite fun to skate something like that because it's designed not to be skated. It poses a bit more of a challenge than a normal object. There's new stuff popping up in the city every single day to skate, new buildings, new developments, and a lot of them nowadays come pre-skate stops, so you can't skate, and every now and again you'll find like a little gem where you can skate. There might not be security guards, but you can have a go. A lot of the...
So this object is it's just it's honest. It's one-to-one with itself. It doesn't pretend to be something else. You know, you can't sleep on it. You can't sit on it for a long time. You can't skate. You can use it as an object for skating. It's too heavy to move it around. It's basically indestructible. And but then, in a way, I think we need objects like that. We need objects that are just simple objects, and which they fulfill their only task of being a bench for 5 minutes, or there were also other examples, but this is the most radical one. That challenges kind of this incapability of making associations and adaptations, and it's just what it is. And I think design, good design in a way, has to have something like that. An object that has to kind of stay most of the time in the back, as like a silent butler, but that you can count on that object. You know that it's always there, but it doesn't interfere in a way in reality. Either through color or through whatever. So this fact, this I think we need something like that as well. Also in art, I think to some degree, I try to think of that as a possibility of being like that. These are hand corrections by Iris Murdoch from a later period. When she tried to make some sort of sense. Let Him Be Caesar, for example. Jackson's Dilemma was her last novel that she tormented her. And from those hand corrections I created sculptures made of iron bars. The work is called Finish or Abandon. It's this question, would you finish or you abandon the project? You never abandon the project, and Iris Murdoch never abandoned it. This is another poem that I wrote for a performance, and I'm trying to reenact it now for you. This is how I worked with the text this time. That wasn't good. The back. Skip back. Amor sopra in retardo. This is like really strange to describe. Amor sopra in retardo, meaning something like a retarded soup. So imagine that was one of the instructions. Can you do at me daybreak through this kind of retarded way? Words as puke. So daybreak, day, rain. So this is what I tried to kind of give to them. That they will take only like the like a thin layer of the word to try to transcribe it like that. So you only have a feeling of the word, but you don't get the word. So scratches would be scratch. That would be scratch. bit of it's skipped. Iris in is it. To make sense, it. The rest of it is charity. Is is re. So we insisted on re. Terra is ra. This is kind of how we did this part of the poem. And as a description of this type of method, words are sticky substances that slow down our perceptual tendency to translate lively things into potential useful things, or to reduce them to repositories of human imagination. Again, Luciano Pitalia with From Too Late, and The Oak. Always the last frame of the film, the actors look at the camera. So there is this kind of, why they look at the camera, because you would think about, like, why am I showing, why is he showing us this kind of images from cinema with this kind of, it's this kind of, with it's too late, it is never too late actually. If you look to yourself, basically, it is never too late. So we are doing this. This is like a production. Whatever goes on here, it goes on here. But what about you? So how would you think of this? I don't think I have enough time to go through all this right now. How are you standing the time?
It's almost 7:30.
So maybe we have like kind of done.
Hmm?
Is it done? More or less over?
I think we started like around an hour ago,
Mm.
if I'm right.
So much material, God.
Politics.
Just listen to this poem.
Leave the room to itself. Compare it to a sleeping, living creature. Time is the dark, packed house of this place, the luck of the desert, cut into the floor of the desert. Everything's ready. A light burns wherever necessary, like skin. Politics.
Leave the room.
Leave the room to itself. Compare it to a sleeping, living creature. Time is the dark, packed house of this place, the luck of the desert, cut into the floor of the desert. Everything's ready. A light burns wherever necessary, like skin, like a prison, each thought's an instant ruin. Leave the room to itself. Here's a needle. Here's the sea.
And I might just leave you with this image. It's rather sad. It's rather sad that we can only meet people whose dates overlap with ours. This is what W.H. Auden wrote in a poem to Gilbert White. And you interpret this as you want.
Best at the moment. The best is this, the best I can at the moment. Best thing is this, I can, the do best is, this is best, I the best you can, I is the best moment, and this is the best and can, I do the best at the moment, this is this, I can, the best, I do the best, this is best, you I can, I is, I can, I do the best, it is, I can, the best at the moment, you can, this best, can, do the best, as the and the best is this, I can, I do the and best, this is, I is, can, I do the at this moment, best, do the moment, best, and can, I is the best, and I this is the best, and do the can, I is the best, and do is this the best, this is I is can, is the is best, as the and the best is this is I can do at this moment, best, do the moment, best, and can, I is the best, and I this is the best, and do the can, I is the best, and do at this can, this is I, this is as to is I, this is best moment.
performance I'll make at the Royal Academy. This is the best I can do at the moment. And it works brilliant with the dancers.